What's the rumpus, Interbumpus? This is and this is I Played a Thing, Space Harrier and Friends. Today we'll be making what I expect will be our last trip to the arcade this series, covering 2 more Sega Superscalar games, and a few later works from Namco and Konami. Before launching into the usual, I should mention that, in the course of my digging, I learned that this type of game has a name in Japan, Supehari-kei, meaning Space Harrier type. Supehari being one of those Japanese-style abbreviations like Pasokan for personal computer or Pokemon for pocket monsters. Anywho, first up today is Thunderblade, a game that I can't help but feel a little sorry for. It launched Sega's X-Board alongside Afterburner, and while fairly popular in its own right, was massively overshadowed by the F-14 phenomenon. A year later, it was one of 2 Japanese launch titles for the Mega Drive, alongside the far superior Space Harrier 2. Poor Thunderblade. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Whereas Afterburner owed a debt to the likes of Top Gun and Iron Eagle, Thunderblade likely drew inspiration from Airwolf and especially the 1983 Roy Scheider movie Blue Thunder. Not only does it feature a heavily armed blue helicopter and have thunder right there in the name, that title screen you're looking at right now? Yeah, that's actually a digitized still from Blue Thunder with the color removed. Oh, Sega. 1987 was clearly a very different time for international copyright. That aside, Thunderblade is a pretty laid-back game, putting it in stark contrast to its X-Board littermate Afterburner, and even shorter at only 4 stages and about 15 minutes in length. It's also only part Supehari-kei, as gameplay alternates between Harrier style and more straightforward overhead perspective. That's enough to warrant its inclusion in this series, though, so let's spin up the rotors and roll with the thunder. You can see here that, at least on a basic level, the controls aren't too different from Afterburner's. There are some big differences in their practical applications, but at least most of the bits and bobs are about the same. And as you can see here, Thunderblade actually starts off in an overhead view. Pretty nice use of scaling to show your altitude, and I like the way they used parallax scrolling to give the buildings a sense of depth. Pretty nice stuff for 1987. And I love that transition. Each stage has 3 sections, at least up until the final stage. There will be an overhead view, there will be a Space Harrier style view like this, and then there will be a quasi-boss sort of stage. We won't see that one in the attract mode. However, if we give it time, the attract mode will show us almost the entire game, so we might as well get this thing rolling. You do have to take off, and interestingly, you can actually land again. Also, if you turn the speed all the way down, you can hover, because you are, after all, a helicopter. In practice, there's really no reason you're ever going to want to hover. It just leaves you a sitting duck for anything that happens to want to take a shot at you. But it's just a nice little concession to the fact that you are flying a whirlybird. Mission starts now. The first 30 seconds of gameplay are sort of a trial run. If you die in the first 30 seconds, that won't actually count against your lives. But we have now passed the 30-second mark, and now every death counts, so I'll try to avoid taking any. The first stage of Thunderblade is actually really easy. The enemies, for the most part, don't even really bother trying to aim at you. At most, they just lob a shot in your vague general direction, and I was just showing there that you can continue to land and hover when you're in the behind the helicopter view, so that's kind of neat. Now, in the overhead view, your missiles aren't really good for all that much because they just shoot down at the same angle roughly that your shots do, but when you're in the behind the helicopter view, or the Space Harrier type view like this, missiles get a lot more important because they now fire down, whereas your shots are going more or less straight ahead. So they're useful not only to fire at ground targets, but also at aerial opponents that are a little bit below your level, like I just did there. So yeah, the missiles are now dumbfire as opposed to the homing ones of Afterburner. Speaking of Afterburner, hello Jets. But you have as many of them as you want, and they do have a little bit of a splash damage area, so you don't have to perfectly buttonhole the enemy with the rocket itself. The explosion around it will do a little bit more of the work for you. And much like with the overhead, I like the way they used multiple sprites stacked front to back here to give the buildings a sense of depth. As big a fan as I am of the Genesis, and to a slightly lesser extent the Saturn, and to a slightly lesser extent than that, the Dreamcast, Sega really was most at the top of their game in the arcades. They just were always at the top of the tech curve and had a lot of really clever designers. Anyway, I've gone and rambled into the beginning of the boss stage here. The third section of levels 1 through 3 in Thunderblade, you'll have a big target like this battleship here, and you don't actually have to destroy any particular amount of it. The only real objective is to get to the end of it, at which point it will be automatically destroyed, no matter how much of it you did or didn't destroy along the way. But the speed control gets really, really important here, because the enemies in the boss section will always do their best to bring you down. Even on the first level, they target you pretty damn effectively, as you can see. So you can actually use your speed control to back up a little bit and just keep yourself out of harm's way. Speed control can also help you get a good time bonus at the end of the level, as you saw there. And you also get a bonus based on how many enemies you destroy, the best bonus always being 50 or more. So I always try to hit the 50 enemy kills target for any given stage. And as we proceed into the second level, I take my first death. It's nothing more than you'd expect from a game that uses scaling to always indicate your altitude, but I do like the way the camera kind of plummets along with you when you die in the overhead stages. And once again, I really like what they did with the parallax and the multi-layered sprites on the canyon walls here. All in all, I really don't think there's ever been a company that did as well with sprite-based 3D as Sega. The enemies, as of Stage 2, are starting to aim a little bit, but still, they're pretty much just kind of lazily winging a shot in your approximate area, as opposed to really aiming at you with any degree of precision. So, the game hasn't really ramped up its difficulty all that much yet. The canyon walls and the overhead sections do make things a little tighter for your dodging, which is exactly what led to me getting killed there at the beginning of the stage. And you have these sections of flight through the canyon in the Space Harrier type perspective sections. You have to worry about these stalactites, stalagmites, pillars, and what have you. Flying a helicopter through a cave really doesn't strike me as particularly wise, and there you see exactly why. It's a hell of a big cave. They've managed to roll a small tank division in there. And you may recall I mentioned that Thunderblade is a much more laid-back game than Afterburner, which you can easily see in the pacing, but also listen to that music. It's kind of a nice mellow funk. Good music to fly by. Good music to do some tank busting by. It's kind of weird that the tanks are actually able to do anything about you, because I am certainly no expert in military hardware, as my past videos have easily shown, but, I don't know, is it just me, or would shooting down a helicopter with a tank be a difficult to the point of impossible thing to ever conceive of doing? Well, never mind that. We've come to the second boss section, and just like Sky Target, we've got another MD Geist giant desert tank battleship thing here. This one I think is actually a little easier to survive than the battleship at the end of the first stage, because the turrets shooting those blue Cheerios at you are, well, blue Cheerios is silly, they'd be Fruit Loops, I guess. And shooting those blue Fruit Loops at you, they're spread out on the left and right extreme sides of the tank, so that means if you can keep one of the sides off camera most of the time, you don't even have to worry about that side at all. And it really seems like you ought to be able to destroy that glowing panel there, but you can't do anything to it no matter how many shots you pump into it. Nice Sega advertisement there, though. And with that, we are already halfway through the game. The third level, though, is where the gloves kind of start to come off. We're flying through a flooded canyon in this one. And I guess the enemy's naval forces have decided that the armor division was kind of letting the side down, so they've decided to show the tankies how it's done. Also, kamikaze helicopters. Can't forget about that. Yeah, starting with this stage, the ground targets actually get kind of good at what they do. The boats are way more effective than the tanks in the previous stages at actually firing in your direction, as opposed to just shooting more or less straight ahead and up and hoping for the best. They're not especially more effective in the behind the helicopter view here, though. Well, no more effective in terms of accuracy, anyway. They are a little more effective just by sheer force of numbers, just kind of blanketing the sky with cannon fire. And of course, the kamikaze strategy is just as effective as ever. What if I don't want to take off Thunderblade? Oh, alright. So this is the point at which I admit that I've never actually seen Blue Thunder. I mean, I've seen trailers for it, but I've never watched the entire movie. Anyone who's seen Blue Thunder, what do you think? Is it worth watching? I'm sure it would be quite dated at this point, being a 1983 movie, was it? But, hey, I'm totally up for 80s cheese. That's kind of a nostalgic aesthetic for me, because, although I was a child of the late 70s, technically, most of my formative years did fall in the 80s, and to a lesser extent the 90s. Really kind of a pain in the ass with all this foliage around that you can't really see the enemy watercraft through. And it occurs to me around this point that I've been talking about the enemy armor division and the enemy naval forces and things like that, and just like Afterburner, I have no idea who the enemy actually refers to in this. Are we going up against an enemy nation? Is this like just straight up war? We taking down some criminal organization with no particular nationality? I have no idea. As you've probably noticed with a lot of these games in the old arcade days, there wasn't really much made of plot. But with a game like this, I suppose you don't really need it. And I do quite like the 3D effect they did on the fins of this giant plane. I mean, that is a big-ass aircraft. Would something like this ever actually be able to fly? I do not know my aeronautics, or my aerodynamics, or whatever the appropriate term would be, but it seems improbable. Still, it looks cool. And with a video game, that's the important thing, isn't it? And unlike the thing at the end of the giant desert tank, we can actually blow up the cockpit section there. Rather satisfying, that. Once again, we get our full 50+ bonus, and we are on to the fourth and final stage. And this has been a short trip. Stage 4 brings us to another city, this time at night. And this is only going to have 2 sections rather than the usual 3. We're going to finish it up in the Space Harrier view segment this time. And we're actually going to have a boss in the Space Harrier perspective. That'll be a first for this game, and ooh, plowing into the building there looked kinda nasty. It'll be a boss that we actually have to destroy, too. We can't get away with just flying past it. But as you will see when we get there, it's pretty damn easy. Now for our final stretch, we have to fly through this sort of futuristic refinery-looking thing. Is this like an oil-rich country we're attacking? Well, there's certainly been no history of that. And we've got the usual tanks and helicopters opposing us, and on top of that we have to weave through the pipes that are spanning the sections of the refinery or whatever it is, so that makes things a little bit hairier. Harrier as in more Harry, not Space Harrier. I think we're getting fairly close now, though. And coming up soon, I think I do something really stupid. Yeah, way off target. Thought I'd be slick there and try and thread the needle between those pipes, which I don't think is even possible. Think you have to fly under the whole pipe assembly like I just did after respawning there. Nevertheless, we are coming right up on the not especially grand finale, which is gonna be this purple fortress here. And we can pick off its cannons very easily, despite their endless arsenal of Dorian fruit, the most cruel and sadistic of all weapons. Then we can take down the tower on the right. And finally, we destroy the bubble dome on the left. And none of it really takes all that many shots. Bingo bango, and that is the end of Stage 4, and the end of Thunderblade. And for our efforts, Not Ray Scheider gives us a respectful salute, and flies off into, well, it was just night, so I guess that would be the sunrise. And our confirmation that it is, in fact, the end. A short trip, but a reasonably sweet one. I do like some of the things they did with the technology in this, perhaps not as visceral as the speed rush of Afterburner, but a lot of really nice depth tricks to be accomplished just with 2D sprites. And I also like that I get to punctuate my name with a raccoon this time, because why not? Or maybe that's a wah. Raccoon, wah, it's all good. We've had a lot of really high-scoring games from Sega, haven't we? Anyway, yeah, that's Thunderblade. It's a lot easier than Afterburner, and a lot easier than Space Harrier, and you can knock it down in about 15 minutes, but I could think of a worse way to blow away a little pocket change back in the waning 80s. And that is about all I have to say about that. On to the next. The Y board has really been getting a raw deal in this series, hasn't it? We've had one iconic mega hit and one pleasant trifle for the X board, but for its more powerful successor, all we've seen has been boring-ass G-Lock, and Strike Fighter, which is really just a slightly less boring-ass G-Lock. Well, it's time to change all that with 1988's Galaxy Force 2. If that name has you wondering what happened to Galaxy Force 1, it's exactly the same thing that happened to Afterburner 1, i.e., released for a very short time in Japan before being shoved aside by its upgraded version. Now, to be honest with you, I don't think GF2 is a brilliantly designed game. Your real opponent is your rapidly auto-depleting energy, a la Thunderceptor, while the actual enemies are largely inconsequential, turning every level into a mad dash at full Afterburner while trying not to smash yourself into stage obstacles. And yet, despite its fundamental flaws, I consider Galaxy Force 2 an absolute must-play for any admirer of the superscalar aesthetic, simply because it's one of the most beautifully rendered showpieces of sprite-based 3D in the history of the medium. So, who wants some eye candy? Cute little guy in the lower right there, don't you think? That's a very interesting top score. It would be very difficult to get ones all the way across the board even if you were trying, but when you're baked into the ROM, I guess that's the sort of thing you don't have to worry so much about. And as we witness the very nicely rendered takeoff, you can see what I mean about the auto-draining energy. Your ship constantly loses health at all times, and you take your first few hits on the shield, but eventually the shield will run out, and then any further hits to you will further drain your energy. And I would like to note for the record that I actually have the energy drain set to the slowest possible. In just about any Galaxy Force 2 machine that you would find in the wild back in the day, your health would actually leach away faster than it does here, which is really just kind of appalling. And here you can see the goal of every stage, which is to penetrate the enemy fortress, just as it said. And eventually you will have to find the core and destroy it. And destroying the core is just a simple matter of point and shoot. It doesn't actually do anything to oppose you, so it's not a boss fight or anything. This game doesn't actually have any bosses, come to think of it. No end boss or anything like that. You just always have to reach the end of the stage, and that's all you've got to do. Which I guess puts it more or less in line with the game we just covered, Thunderblade, although that did have at least a final boss. And well, you get the idea of Galaxy Force 2 from that, I imagine. Plays a little bit like Sky Target in that the lock-on is very critical, like Afterburner.
Starship command to destroyers. Begin takeoff countdown. Roger. Shield strength maximum. Fuel. Check. Control. Check. Weapon. Check. Ground crew clear. Check. Seatbelt fasten. Check. All systems. Check.
Well, thank you, Junior Safety Patrol, for making sure I had my seatbelt fastened. You saw there that you can choose your starting level, but you do eventually have to go through all of them, so I will just go through them in the default order. And yeah, wow, in that very garbly bit of speech there, you get a taste of one of the Achilles heels of Galaxy Force 2. As impressive as its visual design is, its audio is, well, equally unimpressive. The music throughout the game is really just kind of there. Certainly not offensive to the ear, but nothing to write home about. And the sound effects, similarly, are serviceable, but nothing I would call pulse-pounding. And wow, that potato-quality voice sample. I do not know what to make of that. Maybe they just really had to save on ROM space somewhere. As I had started to say before the potato speech, the mechanics of this game are a little bit like Sky Target, in that it is very lock-on centric like Afterburner. You do have your purple gunshot there, but it's not really your focus offensively. And you do have completely unlimited missiles in this game, so it's actually a fairly good idea to be spamming them constantly, because as you've probably noticed, your lock-on range is very wide. Really, all enemies have to be is sort of vaguely in front of you, not directly in your crosshairs for you to be able to lock onto them, and you can lock onto a lot of things at once. So it's a little more Afterburner than Space Harrier, but a little more Sky Target than anything else, because you do have free range to navigate wherever you need across the screen. Well, that is our first core down, just as in the Attract mode, and with the second stage here, we start to see the visual design and the Y-board technology of Galaxy Force 2 really start to shine. This fire stage is probably nothing you haven't seen many times and seen done better at this point in your life, but in 1988 this was pretty mind-blowing. It was like that second stage of Life Force, only in 3D, and that's pretty damn sweet. The power-up I just got there, those will be dropped on you at certain points throughout the levels, and all they really do is enhance your already pretty generous lock-on abilities, letting you target even more things at once. Not really anything that has a huge effect on the gameplay, but I guess it's nice. Now, one thing you probably have not been seeing very much of thus far is enemies really doing much to bring me down. Yeah, the enemies of Galaxy Force 2 are really pretty docile. They will sometimes shoot these little strings of green bullets at you, or in later levels maybe the odd homing missile, but they're never very aggressive with their shooting, and the shots are generally slow enough to avoid without too much trouble, so really the challenge of Galaxy Force 2 is not running into any stage obstacles like those solar flares or the walls, and just do this while keeping the gas press down all the way. You do have a speed control that can go faster or slower, just like Afterburner or Thunderblade, but going slower is never a good idea in this, because then you're just going to run out of energy. Whoa, that was unfortunate. One rather nasty thing in Galaxy Force 2 is that if you get smacked hard enough into a wall, you can kind of get stuck in the wall, as just happened to me a second time. And it can take you a little while to wiggle yourself out, during the course of which you will take several additional hits. And now my energy is low enough that if I play the rest of the fortress here perfectly, I will still have it count all the way down before I can get to the end of the level, I think. Even though the energy is set to its slowest possible depletion, it still counts down pretty damn quick. Oh, and here I am taking hits from even the enemy shots, which are generally very easy to avoid. Not very good playing on my part, and so we will have to suffer for it. And hey, that's the lovely thing about arcade emulation, you will always have all the virtual quarters you will ever need. And so, like a phoenix, we rise from our own ashes, and proceed onward to destroy the core. Something I should mention that I haven't yet is that your energy bonus over on the right will gradually increase as you destroy enemies. And whenever you get to the end of a level, or occasionally a checkpoint, although those are few and far between, your energy bonus will be added to your current energy. And so it does pay to destroy as many enemies as possible. Anyway, with our third stage, we are now onto a green sort of forest and jungly planet. And it's perhaps not as spectacular as the fire stage, but I think it's one of the nicest looking levels in the game. The sort of centipede things like we had over there to the right are very nicely animated, and I like the way the plants seem to be sort of opposed to your presence. Maybe they are thinking creatures, because they keep trying to grow into your path. One of the tougher levels, I would say, is it's one of the few in which you're actually semi-likely to take a decent number of hits from enemies, just because there are so many of them. I do hope that I haven't been sounding overly negative toward Galaxy Force 2 overall. As a game, I really don't think it entirely succeeds for the reasons I've previously mentioned. Oop, a little oversteering there. But it really is kind of fun anyway, just because, well, there's so much to see, and the ship does control very nicely. Ah, here comes the part I really appreciate visually. Getting to cruise through a field of giant mutant dandelion fluff. Just lovely. Hopefully I am not sounding too completely insane when I talk about how pretty this game is. It is, I grant, a very dated and low-tech form of pretty, which is quite possibly going to go over some people's heads who didn't live through this era, or were not into games at the time. For my money, there really is a very special sort of appeal to really well-done sprite-based 3D. And I mean scaling sprite 3D like this as opposed to sector engines like Wolfenstein or Doom or Duke Nukem 3D. Just being able to look at a world with this degree of intricacy and to know that it's all made up of very carefully placed individual sprites all kind of threading together to form this environment, that's something special to me. Like, I don't know, digital pointillism or something like that. And the only examples of it I can really think of that look better than Galaxy Force 2 are on the next Sega Superscaler arcade hardware, the System 32 board, which sadly there are no games appropriate for this series on. But separate from the whole Space Harrier and Friends thing, I would highly encourage, if you like this sort of aesthetic, taking a look at Rail Chase and the Jurassic Park game on System 32, and Outrunners. All that aside, we are now on to our fourth stage, which is sort of deserty like this. One very tricky sort of enemy there that pops up into your path and spreads out that web of whatever they are. That's another very easy way to get hit by enemies, which is something of a rarity in this game. The environment of this level isn't all that crazy, it's just pretty much a desert, although those massive whirlwinds at the beginning were kind of cool looking. But in terms of enemy design and placement, this level does have some nice things to show off. I like the sort of fortified structures placed into the sand earlier on. And I believe we will have a giant sort of battleship thing to look at later, so something to look forward to. For the moment, though, this is just another fortress, really. Nothing terribly special about it. Although every now and then you do have to destroy those sort of worm skins, or possibly living worms. I think they're just cast-off skins, though, because they don't move around or anything. They like to throw those right in your face as you come around a corner. Really short stage. Oh, this is the one, I think. I'm sorry, it's Mission 5 that we're gonna have, I believe, the big battleship. And a world of clouds, it looks like, here. Not sure if the planet even has a surface. Maybe it's a gas giant. Maybe we're cruising over Slylandro. And we do, in fact, have that battleship cruising by above us. Quite possibly taking a bit of inspiration there from Star Wars and the slow flyby of the Star Destroyer. Oh, we've got ice. Looks like there's a planetary surface after all. Anywho, that Star Destroyer type craft is another good example of what I really like about really well done sprite-based 3D. Sure, it may not look as good as a modern giant spaceship would, done in a very high detail 3D model, but you have a really convincing 3D object like that with a degree of complexity to it, and knowing that that was made without having a single polygon to work with, just layers and layers of 2D drawings, that's something special to me. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy. But we all knew that, didn't we? And a merciful checkpoint. Can't say as I mind that. Yeah, we've got trees and shit that I did not remember coming in. We definitely have a planetary surface. Which is too bad. I think some neat things could be done with a gas giant in an environment like this. A little more than just clouds, I imagine. But that's okay. This planet looks pretty nifty in its own right. Oh, and we're going inside the Star Destroyer. That's a nice touch, I think, for our latest enemy fortress. Something a little different than just throwing another cave in your path. Oh, mind the ceiling. Lots and lots of what appeared to be hangared enemy craft inside what I guess is a carrier after all. So that's a good opportunity to build up your energy bonus a bit. And for our final stage, we are in what must be some kind of wormhole or hyperspace warp or something like that. All I know is Galaxy Force 2 has suddenly turned into not only a game, but a trip toy. The colors, man. Oh my goodness, and I can't believe we've gone this long without me talking about the Super Deluxe cabinet. As with so many games like this, in addition to the standard upright cabinet, there was a Super Deluxe version, and it was a big mother. Certainly nothing as crazy as the R360, but one of the more impressive examples of its type. It was this big dome-shaped thing that only had a little bit of vertical tilt, but could turn around nearly 360 degrees, so as you were playing it would spin you around in various directions, and it was just a real cool experience. There were only about 400 of them ever made, but I was lucky enough to actually be able to play Galaxy Force 2 in that form at one of the big boardwalk arcades in Ocean City, Maryland. I think it was Fun City or Marty's Playland, both of which are still around. And yeah, really cool experience. I will have to put a link to a video example of it in the description. But whereas Galaxy Force 2 isn't entirely brilliant as a game, as an interactive ride, it certainly kicks the hell out of those roller coaster motion simulators or those tsunami sumo things you'll see at Dave & Buster's sometimes. It looks like we're gonna bring this one down to the wire. We're almost at the end, but we're almost out of juice, and will we make it? We will. Thanks to your outstanding courage and efforts far beyond the call of duty, the evil forces of the Fourth Empire has now been completely destroyed. Not only the people of the Juno system, but also every single civilization in this galaxy gives full applause to your achievement. Your name shall be long remembered as the ace of the ace commanders in the Galaxy Force. Well, we get a little bit of story in the end. Better late than never.
Roger.
What a nice jazzy little tune we get for the name entry. I like that.
Roger. Roger.
So that, gentle friends and travelers, is Galaxy Force 2. It has its share of issues, chief amongst which is the main source of difficulty being your rapidly auto-depleting health, but in 1988, an absolutely gorgeous game and grand technical achievement. Even today, I think it's still pretty nice to look at. In retrospect, I think the Super Deluxe is what really puts this over the top as an overall experience. As much fun as it would be to get flipped upside down and all, I don't think even the R360 would quite save G-Lock, whereas here, there's enough of a core of gameplay that the added energy of feeling your body move, being surrounded by real-world motion and flashing lights, that would make it a complete package. I feel very fortunate to have had that experience, and I dearly wish I could share it with you all, though I do understand that, at least as recently as the mid-2000s, the Skylon Tower in Ontario still had a working Super Deluxe Galaxy Force 2. There any Canadians out there who can confirm or deny its continued presence? In any case, that's 2 games down and still 2 to go, so let's cube on over to the next. We've saved the galaxy, and now we're ready to feel the burn. We last visited Namco with the savagely difficult Thunder Scepter, and now in Burning Force we shall see that in 1989 their hatred burned just as hot. Burning Force is going to be our first friend of Harrier, in which you spend most of the game limited by gravity. It concerns one Hiromi Tengenji, military cadet, and her journey to graduate from Earth University and become a full-fledged space fighter. Hiromi's final exam will see her astride the Sign Duck. Yes, that sign is in stop sign, duck is in quack quack, your guess is as good as mine, a hoverbike that does not have free movement along the y-axis. The result is something that feels fundamentally different from the other games we've seen so far, and is ball-breakingly hard. Get ready to see me die a lot. That said, it's a pretty neat game, and while nowhere near as graphically complex as Galaxy Force 2, has a bright and engaging aesthetic all its own. Alright then, cadets, let's saddle up. For use exclusively in Japan? Oh no! Surely I'm going to be prosecuted to the full extent of the jam. But seriously, folks, The arcade version of Burning Force, which is what we'll be looking at today, was only released in Japan. However, there was a Genesis version that was released in the US and Europe, so any Western folk who are familiar with this game will probably be most familiar with that version. And it was a pretty good port. The Genesis didn't have hardware scaling and rotation support, so of course the scaling and rotation effects used in this game couldn't be replicated, but overall, pretty solid conversion. Anyway, we're about to hit the attract mode, so we'll get to look at the original version. And if I have one quibble with this game besides the difficulty, it's that the HUD is kind of obtrusive. Takes up quite a bit of screen real estate, doesn't it? But you get used to it. Anywho, unlike Thunder Scepter, in Burning Force we will at least have the option to continue, but that continue will kick us back to the beginning of the stage we're currently on, and we want to get through this game before we're all old and gray, so we're going to cheat. Yes, infinite lives, I think that will do nicely. And off we go. Now there are a few things at the bottom of the screen that are worth noticing. In the lower left, of course, we have our lives, and a little bit to the right of that there's a green thing that looks a little bit like a radar. Ooh, wide shot. Actually the best weapon in the game, in my humble opinion. Anyway, that green thing, as I was mentioning, is our speed indicator. You have a very responsive speed control in Burning Force, which, since we don't actually have vertical movement, is a very handy thing. And there's the laser, which has penetration, but overall is just not as good as the wide shot in my opinion. To the right of the speed indicator, we have our missiles, which are limited, and which will actually not be restored when we lose a life. Right here we have our first mini-boss. Every level in Burning Force is represented as a day, and each day is divided into 4 sections, or areas as they're indicated here. The first 2 areas will end in a mini-boss fight. At the end of the 3rd section we'll have the proper boss, and the 4th area of each day is a bonus stage. There was a jump there that would launch us up to collect that laser. There are jump pads and ramps in this game. I missed that one, but we will see plenty of them. And anyway, getting back to the indicators, to the right of the missiles is our timer. And whenever you die, you do get time back on your timers, so it's fairly unlikely that you'll ever survive long enough to have any risk of running out of time. But in any case, that's one thing that the speed control can address. Also, you noticed I hit an enemy there and I got knocked back. Running into most enemies in Burning Force is not lethal. It will actually just whack you backwards a little, and in some cases that can actually be tactically helpful. Now, Area 3 in each day, you will be picked up by this carrier type thing here. And that is Miss Kyoko, your instructor. Miss Kyoko will show you the weak points of the boss, not that they're generally hard to find, and the sign duck will be outfitted with a plane chassis. There's a little graphical issue in the emulation that we'll always see in these stages. Apologies for that. The weapon I just picked up, the CL, I don't know what that officially stands for, but I call it the color laser, which combines the penetration of the laser with some of the width of the wide shot, although I think the additional width of the wide shot is still better overall. Anyway, so yeah, when you get that plane chassis in Area 3 of each day, that is when this game becomes a bit more Harrier-like, because of course you can fly around. Although, one thing that's kind of unusual in a game of this type is that Burning Force does not actually have any analog controls. It is entirely digitally controlled, which is why the plane there seems to kind of change directions with a little bit of a snap, as opposed to transitioning a little more fluidly between one direction and the next. Area 3 of each day is usually pretty short. There's just a little bit of shooting and dodging amongst the regular enemies before you go up against the boss. And the boss is usually a larger and hardier affair than the mini-bosses from previous areas. But we got it covered. And that's going to move us on to our first Area 4. And each Area 4 will be a bonus stage, in which you retain the use of your aircraft chassis and try to follow a snaking path of bonus balloons, which will each give you the points that is listed on them, in denominations of 10, 100, or 1000. I tend to think these would be a bit easier if you had analog controls, but hey, you go to war with the joystick you have. And at the end, your points are totaled up, and you lose your aircraft chassis and are back to the regular sign duck as you move on to the next day. Day 2 sees us skimming across a desert, and I have to wonder whether these are sort of holodeck type simulations, or if these are just training grounds. Oh, there's our first successful use of a jump pad. But yeah, I wonder whether these are training grounds or some kind of virtual thing, or if Hiromi's actually going on actual missions as part of her final exam. I tend to think it's at least physically real, just because there's no indication of anything that would be a giveaway for VR, but I don't know whether this is a battle with real enemies, or if it's just a live-fire exercise at the school, or what the deal is there. I will say that the destructions of the sign duck at least seem to be real, and that Hiromi takes them with admirable grace and poise, just kind of somersaulting right onto her next bike. She goes through a lot of sign ducks, though. This has to get kind of expensive for the Academy. Oh well. I guess if you get a good space fighter out of the deal, then must be cost effective, or else they wouldn't do it. I'm probably thinking about this too much. Anyway, Area 2. I do like the way this game varies up the backdrop a little from area to area in addition to day to day. Like, we didn't have all those structures in the background before. That is one thing that gets lost in the Genesis version, in which the background doesn't change from area to area. But still, overall, I have to say, the Genesis port of this is pretty impressive, because if memory serves, it was a fairly early third-party Genesis game, and while the scaling is not as smooth because the system doesn't support it in hardware, it's a pretty accurate port. Although one key difference is that to make it actually beatable without having a ton of quarters, it's quite a bit easier, and there are temporary invincibility power-ups that do not exist in the arcade version. Maybe the most impressive thing about the Genesis version, especially given how early it was, is that the ground textures are perfectly replicated. And I just picked up the second missile type. The normal missile type that you start out the game with is a cluster of homing missiles, whereas the missile type that you get with the M icon will fire out a single missile that explodes into this swirling green stuff. For my money, the regular homing missiles are a bit more effective as a panic button to take out enemies that are surrounding you when you're at risk of dying, whereas the green swirly missile thing is more effective against mini-bosses and end-of-day bosses. Speaking of end-of-day bosses, we're soon going to be coming up on another one. Thank you, Miss Kyoko, although I really have to question that creepy platform thing you ride on. I suppose I should probably make mention of those flashing warning lights there that you occasionally get at the top of your screen and come along with a siren. Those, as near as I can tell, mean that there are going to be enemies coming up on you from behind. Not especially helpful because you're going to see them right around the same time, but I guess a little bit of extra warning never hurts. A much-needed missile refill. Thanks for that, game. And at last the boss arrives. The capsule thing, as Miss Kyoko's instructions indicated, are nothing you can do anything about, but from time to time, we will have the spacecraft thing fly out of them, and that is your opportunity to do some damage. What's tricky about it is it's hard to get in front of for any period of time, because it does constantly fire forward. And then if you try and take it on when it gets real close, you have to be careful not to jump the gun, as I keep doing, because you'll just smack into it. At least, unlike most games of this type, smacking into it won't actually kill you. Damn it. Stop doing that, me. Oh well, awkward or not, a victory is still a victory. And we get to reap the rewards in our second bonus stage. Sadly, I don't get any perfects in the course of this playthrough. I come close a few times, but I believe if you get all of the bonus bubbles, there will be an additional bonus granted to you at the end of the stage. Not too bad. Think I only missed one there. And that brings us to day 3. I do think it's nice that we do get an actual different texture from time to time on the ground there, as opposed to just always having palette swaps of the zigzaggy one. Lots of jump action going on here. Didn't save me or anything, but nothing in this game will. As you've noticed, every now and then, someone from the Academy will fly by and give you a power-up, so they're not always just there waiting for you in the stages. Getting really smacked around a bit here, but it doesn't really do me any lasting harm, so who really gives a shit? Not I, said the sign duck. And our boss here looks like some kind of android Sentai team. Little gratuitous rotation there on the center guy. Not bad. Not really sure what this environment is supposed to be. By the absence of stars, I think we are indoors as opposed to just at nighttime, but wow. This stage really kind of wants you dead, it looks like. I have no idea why there are casino-looking things that will spin around when you shoot at them, but I don't know, maybe we are in a casino. Seems like a particularly odd place for a training exercise, or a mission for that matter, but who am I to question Burning Force? One of the difficulties of being gravity limited in this game and not being able to fly around on your standard bike is that it gets rather easy to be pinned into a corner sometimes. You'll just keep dodging to one side, and before you know it, you'll find yourself pinned down and unable to get out of the hole into the other side of the screen. Ah well, I will try to stay alive as much as I can, which will not be very much, but we've cheated our way into an infinity of hover bikes, so at the end of the day, it doesn't really have any consequence, now does it? I find myself really wishing I had some missiles right about now, because plinking away at this boss with the standard pea shooter is a little bit of a slow process, and of course opens us up to more deaths. Never mind missiles, even if I just had a wide shot or something, that would be enormously helpful here. Stand still, you little shit. One of the tougher mini-bosses to actually land hits on. Finally. Time for our third briefing. And according to Miss Kyoko, there are going to be little satellite-type things around the boss that are going to be our true target this time. Some pretty nasty AA fire being laid down by those autocannons on the side. But we can handle it. Probably would have appreciated the color laser there more, but then again, if I was going to get killed immediately after picking it up, and thereby lose it, then the missiles are a better long-term choice after all. Yeah, getting a little hairy there. Then again, most of this game is pretty hairy. And wow, if the look of this boss is any indication, maybe we are in a casino. It's a little bit on the colorful side there. Well, we've already got 2 of those orbiters down. And that's 3, and the boss is already down. Very good advice from Miss Kyoko there. Well, now that we've conquered the Space Casino, if in fact that is what it was, then now is the time to collect our jackpot. And as always in this playthrough, I will miss out on the really big payout, but we'll come away refreshingly in the green. And Area 1 of the 4th day finds us on this rather lovely green field. Ah, wide shot. My best friend. And I managed to keep it for all of several seconds. Oh, Burning Force. You are not a kind mistress. You are a lovely mistress, but not a kind one. It's really too bad there never was a deluxe cabinet for this game, because I think, even though it wouldn't be entirely appropriate for the flying sections in the Area 3s, having a hang-on type of cabinet for this would be pretty great, like a bike that you would actually straddle. Alas, such a thing was not to be. Namco did have their share of fancy cabinets for their higher profile games, and of course they were the ones behind the extraordinary Galaxian Theater and Attack of the Zolgear, but on the average they didn't tend to get as crazy with these things as Sega did. Here's another pain-in-the-ass mid-boss. I really kind of get impatient with the ones that spend a lot of the time off the ground so you can only target them from time to time. A well-timed swirly missile can get several hits in, though, which I will exploit as often as my missile supply will allow. Seems like occasionally there's a little bit of a change in the music from area to area, too. Very nice touch. Overall, I think the music in this game is pretty good. Doesn't really compare to Space Harrier, I don't think, which had really extraordinary music for its period, but pretty good. Definitely better than Galaxy Force 2, in my very humble opinion. I think this day overall has my favorite music in the game. Just seems to be very well suited to the wide open spaces feel of this level. The grassy plains and what have you. Oh, no, that was sneaky. Why would you put a jump pad there that its only purpose is to make you miss power-ups? Then again, Burning Force is rather rife with dickishness, so I don't know why I should be surprised by it now. And the pain-in-the-ass mid-bosses keep coming, this one having a sort of teleporter window that it can appear and disappear from. with a battery of homing missiles as well as a forward-firing laser, so you're never really safe no matter what part of the screen you're currently on. Kind of have to get in front while the missiles are coming at you, and then out of the way in time to avoid getting clipped by the laser. Very tricksy. Alright, Miss Kyoko, what's our target today gonna be? Looks imposing. Certainly find myself happy to be in the plane here, because dear lord would this level ever pin you down if you were stuck on the standard sign duck. Freedom of movement does make a very big difference. I mean, not a big difference into how much I get killed, but at least a big difference with respect to how much control you feel in over whether or not you're getting killed. And here comes our boss, and hey, Mothership Stanley, what are you doing here? You belong in a Sega property. Are they okay with you moonlighting like this? Oh well, something we never got to do in Space Harrier is actually doing damage to Stanley, and we get to do that now, so that's kind of satisfying. This is a fairly hardy boss. It takes a good amount of damage to take out even one of those pylons that are our weak spots this time. But being able to hang onto the color laser makes that a little easier, both in terms of targeting and I think also in terms of damage per hit. Those fire tower bombs are a little less helpful than they would be if we couldn't fly, so kind of a poor choice of loadout there, Stan. And we've done it. And as usual, we get our opportunity to claim a little reward here. Yeah, definitely think this would be easier if there were analog controls, but what can you do? Alright, day 5, and if I am not mistaken, this is going to be our final full day. Because if memory serves, day 6 is just an end boss fight. So at this point, Burning Force is going to pull out all the stops and unleash its full fury onto us. Which translates, as you would expect, to dying over and over again, with even greater frequency than I did before. It does seem that you've got more friends coming along to drop power-ups for you. Wonder if those are like teaching assistants, or if they're just other people going through the test who are doing you a solid. Again, I'm probably overthinking, but I do like to think about these things. With really old school things like Space Invaders or what have you, it's kind of pointless, but when a game does enough to create the sense of a world like this, I like to think about the little details that make it complete. Yeah, wow, we're getting lots of helpers dropping stuff for us this time. And that's fine by me, because I'll be dying a lot, which means I'll be losing the power-ups almost as quickly as I get them. What we're actually aiming for here is the horizontal piece that occasionally sort of zippers down the tower and comes after us with lasers. There we go. As long as we destroy that piece, it doesn't matter if we hit the tower itself. Oh, interesting. Apparently it is possible to actually get knocked forward by an enemy coming up behind you, but that's something that's probably not going to happen very much in actual gameplay. I'm fairly surprised that I managed to weave my way through that spread shot a little while ago. I'd be lying if I said I thought I did that on purpose. More than likely, I just got lucky. Well, color laser, I'd rather have a spread shot, but I'll take it. Beats the pea shooter. And I'm even managing to keep it for a little while. All the way to the mid-boss, at least. Weird looking thing. Kinda wish I had the swirly missiles here, because I think this thing would be pretty easy to hit with them. But even if it doesn't do as much damage, the homing missile, at least you don't really have to worry about missing at all. Here is what I believe to be our second to last boss. And we're going for the compound eyes. Rather like the background on this one, they even throw in a little bit of parallax. That architecture looks really familiar. I'm wondering if that's a real-world thing, but if it is, I can't recognize it. Got a battery of swirly missiles there. I think I'll probably be happy to have those going into the boss fight. Kinda wasted my first one there, though. And there, as you can see, if you actually get a direct hit with your swirly missile, I don't know if it does any damage from the direct hit, but it will cause the swirl to go off sooner, and so you can kind of target it that way. That'll do. And I do believe this will be our final bonus stage, and shit, is not this a good beginning. I've been saying final, 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 and I'm going to feel very silly if my memory is betraying me and there's another level before the end boss stage. But I'm feeling pretty confident here. Yes, this is the final day. We'll have a little bit of regular enemy plowing through to do before the final boss, but when it's time for the final boss, we're going straight into it. We will get no guidance from Miss Kyoko this time, and we'll have to find the weak points on our own. Looks like there's a big space battle going on all around us with capital ships and things like that, so if we weren't in real combat zones before, I have a feeling we are this time. Fortunately, it looks like we've got a lot of allies in the field too. And once again, that's very good because I'll be losing my power-ups frequently. Alright, enough already, guys. Give me the end boss already. Ooh, and I get to go into the final battle with a wide shot. Very kind of you, Burning Force. I don't expect kindness from you, so it's a lovely thing when it comes. Alright, this end boss here has multiple stages, and our first target is just going to be that row of cannons on the upper right. Fairly easily dispatched. Next thing we've got to do is go for the green things that are currently launching missiles at us. Once again, an unusual kindness on the part of Burning Force by giving them that swirly green glow, so that makes them relatively easy to see and target, even when the boss is at a good distance out. And we do have to pick them all off one by one. Still rocking my wide shot. Fairly surprising. And at this point, the boss sprouts another cannon in its upper left with swirly projectiles. We've got that down. And now another cannon battery in the upper right. Oh, finally lost my wide shot. Oh well. Got more mileage out of it than usual, so we'll call it a win. Yeah, getting in front of that cannon to actually get your shots in is a pretty dangerous thing. I mean, there's a little bit of a delay between its salvos, but not much of one. And as you probably guessed, our next target is going to be the red ports, which are lasering at us. Once again, a little bit of a delay between shots, but not much of one, so actually getting in front there to do damage is fairly risky business. Oh, I don't believe it actually happens in the course of this fight, but if you take really long to complete any given section of this boss, that big radar dish-looking thing in the center left, that will start firing homing shots at you that are almost impossible to avoid if you take too long. And now we are on what I believe to be the final section of this boss fight, in which the laser ports that we previously destroyed have sprouted mechanical dragon serpent type of things. And they do have fire breath. If memory serves me rightly, however, this is going to be our last task. Once we're able to destroy all of the dragon heads that this fortress thing has sprouted, we will be done. And at least for the moment, there's nothing too bad about it. The fire breath comes slowly enough. But when we've got it down to one head remaining, those fire breaths start to come pretty damn close together, making it a very risky thing to get in front of the remaining head to get your shots in. There we go. Exploit the Mercy invincibility a little bit. That's quite the time bonus. At this point, the game converts all of your remaining lives into points, so I'd better turn off the infinite lives, otherwise it'll sit there giving me points forever. And so, Hiromi Tengenji graduated from Earth University at the top of her class and was awarded the Red Beret of a fully fledged space fighter. And so she had the honor of going off to war. and dying in some horrible meat grinder on a distant dark planet. Or something like that. I'm just making up my own translation here. I have to say that is a pretty nice ride. Fair to say it's a decent upgrade from the old Sign Duck, but the question is, does it have a competitively silly name? Good luck out there, Hiromi! Oh, so that's why this game was so unrelentingly nut-crushingly hard. It was crafted by the devil! Seriously though, I do like Burning Force. It's a good-looking game, it's a good-sounding game, it feels good, although I think it would have felt better with analog control. The only real thing I can say to its detriment is that it's so fucking hard. A constructive manager. He would yell at you all the time, but he'd do it constructively. Well, honestly, Namco, I'm a filthy cheater, but with a you're welcome heart, I enjoyed it. And even though I didn't rightfully earn it, I'm more than happy to drop in my usual initials here. Yeah, I'll give myself a little bling this time. Burning Force. Good times. And if you'd like to play a version of Burning Force that doesn't quite hate you so much, I would also recommend the Genesis version. It's a pretty solid port. Anyway, we've just got one more game left to visit, so let's go on and get down to it. We've had some Sega, we've had some Namco, now how about a little Konami just to round things out? Yes, for our next game, we're warping forward to 1997 and taking a short look at Konami's Solar Assault. This is actually an odd little side trip in the Gradius series. Konami would eventually return the series to its roots with Gradius 4 and 5, but with Solar Assault, they experimented a bit with Space Harrier style 3D and polygonal 3D no less. This, by the way, is a good example of a polygonal Harrier-inspired game with forward aim, providing evidence that it can be done effectively. Perhaps you've noticed that there isn't a whole lot of runtime left on this video. Unfortunately, that's because I can only show the first two levels of Solar Assault for technical reasons. Every version of MAME I've tried has crashed shortly into the third stage, and I don't know of any other emulators that support this game. I did once play Solar Assault in the wild at Kennywood Park just outside Pittsburgh, but I never made it any farther than Stage 3 there either, and Kennywood's once magnificent arcades have since gone the way of most of their brethren. Being rather more advanced than the home consoles of the time, Solar Assault was never ported to anything either. It's really a shame, because what I have played with Solar Assault is pretty good, and makes me want to see more. All that aside, I'll show you as much as I can, so let the assault commence. Ah, Konami, you used to be one of the best in the business. Everything fades. Here we have a new ship, the Alpinia, introduced in this game. dear old Vic Viper. And the Lord British, which I believe was introduced in Life Force. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. As usual, we'll pause for a brief snifter of the attract mode. And much as we did in Galaxy Force 2, we can see here that there's what is basically a version of Life Force's Prominence stage, rendered here in full 3D. Very nice. And you can see that despite being full 3D, this game does use forward aiming, which pleases me. There are games that I can get accustomed to directed aiming in, games that make it work well, like the aforementioned Star Fox 64. But when I can, I do prefer the full Harrier style of forward aiming. Just simplifies life a little. Makes it a little easier to focus on one's flying when simultaneously dodging and returning fire. Alright, I think it's about time to get rolling. And as tempting as it is to fly a spaceship version of Richard Garriott, I think we're gonna have to go with the old standby. And we'll take manual power-up entry because that's how you play a Gradius game. None of that auto shit. The stages in this game seem to have somewhat fanciful names, like the River Styx. And we start out in classic Gradius style, with lines of enemies that, if you can take them all out, give you a power-up. And just like any good Gradius game, as long as you select the manual power-up method, you can use the power-ups to move your meter slowly along the bottom, and then just click the power-up button when you're all ready. And I'm gonna get started with the shield. And then the laser, which, as in most Gradius games, is probably your most potent standard offensive option. The missiles, as in most Gradius-type games, will scoot along the ground, if indeed there is a ground. And for what we're going to be playing of this game, I don't find them terribly useful. So from here on out, while I've got my shield and my missile, or my laser rather, we're gonna aim for getting some options. But first, we have to shoot the core. Yep, our first boss here is gonna be the good old big core. It's nice to see that this game does hit most of the Gradius buttons. I have to wonder if we were able to actually play long enough if we would eventually encounter a Moai stage. I really don't know. Sadly, much of this game will be left shrouded in mystery for us. And without much ceremony, we scoot right along to Fierce Blaze. And if I can take out a full line of these Phoenix-type enemies, we can continue to collect power-ups, and there we go, our first option. I once saw a comic in a Japanese game magazine about someone who had a set of Gradius options just following him around in daily life, and eventually he had to go take a leak, and the options followed right along beside him, pissing in the next 2 urinals. You do want to have a particular care about those fiery dragons that erupt from the lava, because if one of those smacks into you, it will kill you outright, even if you have a shield. Found that out the hard way. Ah, three wonderful options. And now it's time for our boss, which is just going to be a big magma serpent. You'll see at the top there is a boss timer. If you fail to kill the boss in that much time, it will just escape. And here's something weird. This boss in my test plays, and while I was troubleshooting the emulation problem, I was able to take it out pretty fast, but I usually didn't have this many power-ups. Like a lot of times when I got here, I didn't have my full laser and 3 option complement. And I was usually able to kill this boss pretty quickly when I was less powerful. When I'm attacking it with a laser and 3 sets of options, I end up using up a lot of that timer. This thing takes forever to kill, which makes me wonder if it scales to your level of power-ups approximately. I really don't know, but with my current loadout, I'm able to just shoot the hell out of the thing and it just won't die. I can't explain it. All that aside, it's actually an easier boss than the big core. No real trouble dodging any of its attacks. Finally, it goes down. And we can take only a moment's look at Curse, because the real curse of this stage is that it crashes MAME. But yeah, for what we were able to actually see of Solar Assault, not half bad. Not half bad at all. Managed to make the transition into Harrier-style 3D while actually managing to retain a lot of the Gradius flavor, which I think is a pretty good accomplishment. Well then, I guess we'll just have to hope that either MAME gets the bugs out of its system with respect to this particular game, or that some other emulator picks it up, because I don't think we're ever going to see a home version of this one, and I have to imagine the actual arcade machines for Solar Assault have been hunted to extinction by this year 2016. And with that, our episode today comes to a close. Unless I make any surprise discoveries in my research, that is also going to be our last trip to the arcades. I'll miss them so, but I do hope you've enjoyed the ride, and I hope you'll tune in next time when we start looking into some of the Harrier-descended games that appeared on consoles. Until then, this is Un, hoping you have a lovely week coming up, and bidding you adieu. Today's episode was brought to you by Justin Carpenter, Nolden, Zangamarth, Charlie Dunst, Anonymous Benefactor, John Madigan, Johnny Millennium, Sanguine Games, Misha Van Doren, Craig Patterson, Frank Grizzy, Tim J., Lolo De Puzzlo, Joshua C. Ritchie, Jared C. Rice, Darren Chow, Sonic Rose, EX Potemkin, Alicia Goranson, Argyle Jelly, Mechasaurus, DG Jono, Doug Russell, August Fortnite, Patrick Bellinger, and all of my other very generous patrons. I would also like to express my appreciation to all commenters, subscribers, and plain old watchers. With a thankful heart, you are great supporter.